Have you ever truly looked at your shadow? It follows you everywhere, silent, unshaken, never leaving your side. But what if one day it was gone? Not by magic, not by accident, but by choice. What would it mean to live without it? There was once a man named Baraka, born into a land where shadows were sacred. In his village, a person's shadow was believed to hold their essence, their history, their truth, their very being. A man without a shadow was no man at all, but an empty shell. But whether Baraka understood the weight of these beliefs was question for another day. He only wanted to earn his daily bread as he worked no matter what, and these talks of shadows, beliefs, history were all too ancient for him. Baraka had little to his name. His hut was made of patched-up reeds, his clothes were threadbare, and his stomach knew hunger like an old friend. He worked hard, but no matter how much he toiled, his hands never seemed to gather enough. Perhaps he just didn't work smart enough? Probably. One evening, Baraka sat by the river, his stomach hollow with hunger. He had worked since sunrise, yet his hands remained empty. The water shimmered under the fading sun, and his shadow stretched long beside him, silent, useless. He sighed heavily. Just then, the sound of approaching footsteps caught his attention. He turned to see a man in fine robes, his fingers heavy with gold rings. Unlike the weary traders who passed through the village, this man walked with an air of ease, as if wealth itself bent to his will. Without a word, the merchant wrapped a bundle of food, warm, fragrant bread and roasted meat, and placed it beside Baraka. The scent alone made Baraka's stomach tighten painfully. He hesitated only a moment before grabbing the food and devouring it. Between bites, he cast a glance at the stranger. "Who are you?" he asked. The merchant only smiled. Baraka swallowed hard. "Why did you give me this?" Still, the man did not speak. He merely watched, his expression unreadable. And when Baraka had licked the last crumbs from his fingers, the merchant finally muttered, "You seem troubled." Baraka scoffed. "Troubled? I am drowning in poverty. My hands labor, yet they return to me empty." But before he could utter another word, the merchant turned and walked away, disappearing down the path without so much as a farewell. The next day, Baraka returned to the same spot, hunger gnawing at him once more. He had no reason to believe the merchant would return, but something deep inside, a quiet desperation, made him wait. And then, as if fate had heard his unspoken wish, the merchant appeared again. Just like before, he placed food beside Baraka without a word. Baraka grabbed it eagerly, but this time, he kept his eyes fixed on the stranger. "Why do you keep feeding me?" he asked between mouthfuls. The merchant studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled. "About yesterday, perhaps you have more to offer than you think." He stepped closer and pointed to the ground. "That shadow of yours? I will buy it." Baraka frowned. "Buy my shadow?" "Indeed. And in return, I will give you more wealth than you have ever imagined." It was a foolish offer, wasn't it? A shadow was nothing, just darkness cast by the body, shifting and stretching but never solid. And yet, the price the merchant offered was real. A new life. Baraka hesitated only for a moment before nodding. "Take it." The merchant smiled and pulled out a small, glimmering vial. He uncorked it, whispered something under his breath, and just like that, Baraka's shadow lifted from the ground like mist before the morning sun. It twisted, shrank, and slipped into the vial like a captured spirit. For the first time in his life, Baraka was rich. He bought the grandest house in the village, wore clothes of silk, and feasted on food finer than he had ever tasted. People who once ignored him now greeted him with respect. But something was wrong. At first, it was only whispers. Children pointed at him with wide, uneasy eyes. Women hushed their voices when he passed. Men exchanged glances. Then came the fear. People began stepping away when he walked too close. No one invited him to gatherings. When he tried to sit in the marketplace, the vendors found reasons to pack up their goods early. It wasn't long before he understood why. One evening, as the sun sank low, he stood in the village square and looked down. The others stood in clusters, their shadows stretching beside them, dark and long in the fading light. But beneath Baraka's feet, there was nothing. A man without a shadow. It was as if he was not real, not whole. The villagers muttered that he had lost his soul, that he was neither living nor dead. Mothers pulled their children away. Even the elders who had once counseled him now turned their backs. Baraka tried to laugh it off. What do I need a shadow for? I have wealth, I have comfort. But in the quiet of the night, he felt it, an emptiness unlike hunger or thirst. It gnawed at him, made the air feel thinner, the ground less solid beneath his feet. And then came the nightmares. In his sleep, he would see his shadow moving without him, watching him from the corners of his room. It whispered things he couldn't understand, but the sound of it made his skin crawl. Days passed, then weeks, and the weight of his loneliness became unbearable. He tried to join the villagers, but they recoiled. He went to the elders, but they would not meet his gaze. And so, he returned back to his old dirty looks and searched for the merchant. He traveled across valleys, through thick forests, past rivers that whispered in the wind. He wandered for what felt like years, but the merchant was nowhere to be found. Until one evening, when Baraka, now a weary man with hollow eyes, stood again by the same river where the deal was made. The water was still, the air heavy. And there, reflected on the surface, he saw it, his shadow, standing beside him in the water. Not attached to him, not part of him, but separate, watching. "Take me back," Baraka whispered. "I was a fool." But the shadow did not answer. It simply stood, waiting. And so, with the weight of his choices pressing down heavier than any coin purse, Baraka turned back toward the village. Not to reclaim what was lost, for some losses could never be undone, but to seek whatever remained. And that, my dear listener, is how Baraka spent the rest of his days. A man with riches but no presence, a man who walked among the living but belonged to nothing. He had traded a thing he did not value, only to realize too late that it had been the one thing he could never live without. Perhaps this story teaches us that not all riches bring fortune. Some come at a cost far greater than we can bear. For as the elders say, a man who throws away his roots should not be surprised when the winds carry him away.